I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. A good afternoon, everybody. It is August 4th, Sunday. Hope your weekend is going extremely well. And we are just a couple weeks away from the end of the summer break and classes being back in session. And matter of fact, the next live stream 2 weeks from now will be taking place the day before classes start for me. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the end of the summer session. And I'm not a huge fan of summer, to be quite honest. It's too hot. The bugs bother me. All the stuff that goes on during the summer, the festivals and the fairs and everything. I'm too big of crowds. I'm not a crowd person, so I don't go out to those. And yeah, just hot and bothersome. I mean, I mowed the lawn yesterday because it needed it quite badly, and it was 90 degrees. Sun was beating down on me. I was a step away from having heat exhaustion by the time I was done with it. Just miserable. Absolutely miserable. So I look forward to the end of summer, and also fall is my favorite season. So I love when it gets cooler. I love when the leaves change. I love Halloween big time, so I'm a big Halloween fan. Just all the stuff about fall I'm very much looking forward to. But thanks for being here, everybody, today on Sunday, August the 4th. We're going to do a lot of fun stuff today. The main thing we're going to dive into is we're going to be talking about reasons not to be an atheist. I've got a video we're going to respond to that's supposed to be providing us with 6 reasons not to be an atheist. We're going to talk about that and respond to it. And then I'm going to give you some actual decent reasons why one might not want to be an atheist. We're going to talk about some religious news that's been going on in the last couple of weeks, and I'll be taking some questions from viewers from the previous live stream. Of course, anybody who sends in a super chat will get priority, and I'll talk about that. And we've already got our first one of those in, which came in from LHRPG Official, sent in $5. Longtime fan of the show. How you doing there, LHRPG? Says, I finally made it to a live stream from the beginning. Woohoo! All hail Algorithmo. Yes, glad you could make it. Glad you could be here. Thanks for hanging out with us today. All right, so let's not dilly-dally too much. Want to make sure to remind you all, however, to make sure to like this video, comment, and subscribe. Check me out on Twitter if you're ever wanting to know what I'm up to throughout the course of the week. I tend to post a lot of stuff on Twitter throughout the week. My Patreon page if you want to support my work directly. Got a Teespring store if you want to get a sweatshirt, t-shirt, or sticker with my cute little pink cycloptic tribble face on it. All that linked below in the description. All right. So, let's talk about some reasons not to be an atheist. So, I've had a video that I pulled off of YouTube in my files for a long time now, and I've never gotten around to making a response video for it because it's not a well-made video. It's very old. It's very janky. This video has been up on YouTube since 2008. That's 16 years. YouTube's only been around since 2005, so only 3 years into YouTube's existence, this video went up, and it's still there. But I found it, and it's called 6 Solid Reasons Not to Be an Atheist. Now, the reason that I kept it around and I wanted to respond to it at some point is because it does have at least one argument in it, at least one reason that I had never heard before that I thought was worth responding to. But again, it's old, it's janky, it's not well put together, the video quality's bad, the sound quality's bad, and some of the reasons and arguments are quite bad. But I wanted to respond to it somewhere, so I thought I'd do it here in a live stream. So that's what we're going to dive into. So this is called 6 Solid Reasons Not to Be an Atheist, and it's only about 4 minutes long. We'll be stopping throughout it to respond point by point, but let's get stuck into it.
One of the things that the atheists claim is just because we don't know yet doesn't mean it was God. Well, I say to you, that doesn't mean that my God doesn't exist. The fact is, in order for anything to exist, there has to be an uncaused cause, meaning something that has always existed. And that which always existed is by definition immaterial, spaceless, and timeless, because matter, space, and time are finite. And that, my friends, is God.
Okay, so this is something we've heard many, many times before. The uncaused causer, the unmoved mover, prime mover. It's said in 1,000 different ways, and it's been debunked many, many times. So I won't spend too long on it. But saying that we all know that in order for anything to exist, there had to have been an uncaused cause. Well, no, we don't. We don't know that. That's an assumption that you are making. And then to say that it has to be timeless, spaceless, matterless, immaterial, that's the same as saying that it doesn't exist. Saying that something has no matter, nothing makes it up. Saying that it has no location in space-time. Saying that it doesn't exist with any temporality. It doesn't exist with any location. It's the same as to say it doesn't exist. So you first would have to demonstrate that it's possible for something to even exist that has no space-time location, has no temporality, has no matter, nothing making it up. That it's even possible for something like that to even exist before you can insist that such a thing created the entire universe, and to go further and to insist that it is intelligent, that it is willful, that it has all power within space-time, that, it has any of the qualities that they claim God has. You haven't established any of that. So yeah, this is just a bad argument all around, filled with a lot of assumptions, and you have a lot of legwork to do to prove that any of this is even possible before you can then try to insert your God claim into it. So yeah, this is a very classic theistic argument that has been debunked time and time again. Don't want to spend too long on it. The next one is the one that caught my attention a little bit more.
Back in the 1960s, a group of atheists, evolutionary biologists, and mathematicians at the Wistar Institute, all of whom were atheists, set out on a mission to prove that evolution was mathematically valid or probable. But they made a shocking surprise. Given how old the Earth is, 5 billion years old, and how long life has been around, they found that not only it is unlikely, but the chances of life arising and evolving to how much it has are next to zero. But they want to keep it real quiet. Oh, I wonder why.
Okay, so this I had never heard of before, and I had to look into it. So I looked into the Wistar Institute because I'd never heard of it before. And the Wistar Institute is a real organization, but it has absolutely nothing to do with evolutionary biology. The Wistar Institute is a cancer research institute that has done a lot of good work in terms of figuring out new treatments and potential cures for cancer. Well, that has nothing to do with evolution. And so I looked into all of the work that they do and tried to find anything about any kind of work in the field of evolution. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I had to expand my search a little more. It's like, what is this guy talking about with the Wistar Institute debunking evolution? Well, the only place I could find anything about that was from the Discovery Institute. Yes, that wonderful organization of creationists attempting to basically debunk science. And they talked about not the Wistar Institute, but the Wistar Conference. So this was not a organization that came together of a bunch of scientists who went to work doing studies and doing research to debunk evolution. This was one conference that occurred on one day where a bunch of scientists did come together, and there were people there who had problems and concerns with the Darwinian model of evolution. Now, when did this conference occur? Did it occur maybe 15, 16 years ago when this video was made and it was a recent sort of a thing? No, this conference was in 1966. So long time ago, over 60 years ago, or about 60 years ago, and there has been so much research and work done in the field of evolutionary biology since then. Trying to cite a conference that took place over 50 years ago, where some members of the conference had concerns with the model of evolution that was at that time accepted, is a bad way to try to debunk evolution today. And then when it comes to this guy's explanation for what their findings were, well, again, they didn't really have findings. It was a conference. They didn't do any research. They didn't do any experiments. They didn't actually get to work on this. They just talked about it for one day. And when he said that there wasn't enough time in the existence of the Earth for life to go from the origins, the single-celled organisms, all the way up to what we have today, that's not true. He said the Earth is 5 billion years old. It's not 4.5 billion years old, but no big deal there. But life hasn't even existed for that full 4.5 billion years. It's only existed for about 3.5 billion years. So there was a good billion years of the Earth's existence where there was no life on it. The earliest single-celled life can be traced back to about 3.5 billion years ago. Now, that single-celled life did not go to multicellular life until about 1.5 billion years ago. So for about 2 billion years, all the life was single-cell life. Now, if that's your starting point, and you then assume that all evolutionary changes take the same length of time, that to go from single cell to multicell is going to take 2 billion years, well, those multicellular life forms are still pretty basic. To then evolve from those basic multicellular life forms into all the different species and creatures and plants, flora and fauna that we have today would take hundreds of billions of years, if you're assuming the same amount of time needed for all evolution. But we know that that doesn't happen, that evolution does not occur at the same rates at all times. You may have heard of the Cambrian explosion. Cambrian explosion was only about 580 million years ago. And at that point, a massive amount of new species emerged. Basically, once life had evolved into multicellular life forms, it kind of hit the gas pedal and took off like a rocket. And a lot of evolutionary diversity occurred in a relatively short amount of time after that. So, why did they not factor this in back during the Y-Star conference back in 1966? The Cambrian explosion was known about at that point, but it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't something that a lot of scientific interest had been displayed in. That didn't occur until the mid-1970s. When some new new fossil findings that dated back to the Cambrian explosion caused more interest and more research into it. So this Y-Star conference back in 1966, they weren't really factoring in things like accelerated evolution during something like the Cambrian explosion. So, yeah, this is dated research. It's not even research. This is a dated example of a conference that occurred over 50 years ago where some scientists displayed some issues and concerns with the evolutionary model, that a lot of different work has been done since then that has put those fears to rest. So, yeah, this was something I had never heard before, but it was all around a pretty bad argument for why not to believe in evolution and not to be an atheist. And to further go into more depth, just because one believes in evolution does not mean one has to be an atheist. There are the vast majority of Christians, the vast majority of theists accept evolution. So attempting to debunk evolution is not a reason not to be an atheist, because one can accept evolution and still be an atheist. So, yeah. So let's see what else he's got to say.
One thing that is just so typical of the atheist is that they tend to equate God with fairies, unicorns, and flying spaghetti monsters. This only shows how desperate they can get, how weak their arguments are. And when they have to resort to these false analogies, it only shows that their arguments have absolutely no substance. If it were really as obvious that God does not exist like they claim it is, they wouldn't have to be using those cheesy analogies.
All right, so this is barely even an argument. So when atheists trot out things like flying spaghetti monster or comparing God to the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus, that's not desperation. It's, if anything, it's most commonly an attempt to show that atheists place no higher value on a God belief than they do in belief in other mythical figures like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. That's not desperation. That's just to show I don't hold any great reverence for your particular theistic belief. Very commonly, atheists, even more commonly, atheists will compare, if they're talking to a Christian, they'll compare Christianity to Islam or to Hinduism or Buddhism. They'll compare it to other theologies that particular theist does not hold in high regard. And say, how you don't believe in Krishna and you don't believe in the Hindu gods, and you don't believe in Buddhism, and you don't believe in Zeus, and you don't believe in Thor. Yeah, I don't believe in your God the same way. And then they criticize that kind of an argument and say, well, that's not the gotcha that you think it is. Well, we're just trying to make these analogies to showcase to you that you don't hold reverence for mythical figures, and you don't hold reverence for a lot of different theologies the same way we don't hold reverence for yours. It's not out of desperation. It can sometimes be out of mocking, but mocking is a sword that cuts both ways. Let's not pretend that theists don't ever mock atheists and common atheistic positions. So that just seemed like it was tilting at windmills, that particular line of argumentation.
The greatest lawyer of all time is a guy by the name of Sir Lionel Lookham, and was skeptical about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, until one day he was challenged to put his law skills to the test, to apply the resurrection in the courtroom. He spent years going at it. And at the end of the case, he said this, quote, "The evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof, which leaves no room for doubt." Now I ask you this. Are you really willing to risk your eternal life just so you can party and live the way you want to on this limited time on Earth?
Okay, so this one he cites a lawyer. I couldn't make out the name of the lawyer, Sir Lionel Locke, it almost seemed like he was saying. But why do I care what a lawyer thinks about theology? This is kind of like the J. Warner Wallace thing, where he was a cold case detective, and he's going to use his cold case detective skills to prove the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's like, I don't care what a detective thinks about a supposedly historical event. I care what archaeologists think. I care what historians think. I don't particularly care what a cold case detective thinks, and I don't particularly care what a lawyer thinks about the idea of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You don't use quote-unquote lawyer skills or lawyer techniques to confirm supposedly historical events. There are specialized positions, specialized jobs that do exactly that. Paleontologists, archaeologists, historians, they look into these sort of matters, and they do so totally differently than a lawyer looks into how to preside over a legal case. And it's also interesting that the person who made this video does not cite any of that supposed evidence. He just says the evidence for the resurrection is so overwhelming that one would have to accept it. Doesn't tell us what any of that evidence is. Because the evidence that I'm aware of, almost all of it is the Bible. I don't take the Bible as an authoritative source. So one of the very common lines of argumentation for the evidence of the resurrection is the 500 people who saw a resurrected Jesus. But we don't have 500 accounts of people who saw a resurrected Jesus. We have one. We have one account of somebody who claims to have seen a resurrected Jesus. And that was from Paul. Well, he doesn't actually have claimed to have seen him. He claims that 500 people saw a resurrected Jesus. Paul wrote that and put it into the Bible. We do not have a single one of those 500 people. We don't have their names. We don't have their accounts. We don't have anything from them. And the same is true with much of the Bible. With practically everything that the Bible claims, it's not the claims of the supposed people who saw these events, who were there, who witnessed them. This is what scribes wrote down based on second-hand accounts, third-hand accounts, fourth-hand accounts, maybe even further than that, mostly being written down years and years after these events supposedly happened. Again, events that the people writing the Bible didn't actually witness. So, what is the actual evidence? Where is this evidence that's not the Bible? Because I don't take the Bible as an authoritative source. Historians don't take the Bible as an authoritative source. The only historians that do are like historians who work at the Creation Institute, are ones who are specifically creationists, specifically Christians, who are starting from the premise that the Bible is true and then working backwards from there to try to find evidence to show the Bible being true. So, yeah, that part of the video did not even offer any of the supposed evidence for the resurrection. I am unaware of any decent evidence for the resurrection. There's just the Bible and people thinking, feeling that it's true, that it's correct. Well, that's not compelling evidence as far as I'm concerned.
In a society of video games and Hollywood, it's just plain hard to get a good source or a moral compass. Not only is it hard to get a moral compass, but it's hard to get motivation to use that moral compass. Religion, particularly Christianity, is the greatest source for that moral compass and motivation to use it.
This is true. Atheism does not provide a moral compass, nor does it attempt to. Atheism is not a worldview. Atheism is not something that provides rules or standards or anything. Atheism is not believing in God. Nothing else is entailed in that. Being atheist does not mean that you have to believe in evolution. Being an atheist does not mean that you can't believe in souls. Atheists can believe in souls. Atheists can believe in afterlife. Atheists can believe in magic. Atheists can believe in divine beings even, just not a God. You can be an atheist and believe in any number of different things and just not believe in a God. So, that being what atheism is, just not believing in a God, then, of course it doesn't provide any moral framework. It doesn't attempt to. That's not what it's there for. That's not its purpose. It's not its goal. It has no goal. It's just not believing in a God. So, to say that atheism does not provide a moral framework, that's not a bug. That's not a flaw in atheism. It doesn't attempt to. Now, atheists certainly have moral codes. It's just they don't get their moral codes from atheism. And they can get them from a lot of different places. There's secular humanism, there's utilitarianism, there's Kantianism, there's a whole bunch of different secular ways of coming up with moral systems. Or one could just construct their own unique moral system based on their own upbringing, their own personal values, and their own conception of right and wrong. So, in fact, one does not even need to get a moral system from one specific ideology or one specific worldview. I would venture to say that most people's personal moral framework is an amalgamation of a lot of different things, a lot of different places, values, upbringing, the culture that they are raised in, the laws that they are raised under, some that they agree with, some that they don't agree with, and the influence that those experiences have on them in making them think that certain things are right, wrong, acceptable, not acceptable, permissible, not permissible. So it's a wide assortment of different things. And I think that applies to Christians every bit as much as it does to atheists, as you will find from one Christian to another differences in their moral framework. So while they may be getting the large part of their moral conceptions from their religion, you have what's called, cafeteria Christians, people who take different pieces of Christianity almost a la carte style, as like, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. I'll take that, but I don't want any of that. So that's where you can get Christians who do accept evolution, while other Christians say it's completely against the Bible to accept evolution, and you're going completely against your religion in doing so. You can have Christians who are accepting and tolerant of LGBTQ plus people, and you have other Christians who say you can't be a Christian if you accept and tolerate LGBTQ plus people. So even to say that Christianity does provide a good, solid moral framework, one that Christians at large disagree on entirely and have massive infighting among the different denominations about what is actually Christian and what isn't. So Christianity is not actually a solid path towards a unifying moral framework. Everybody still just kind of makes their own specific individual moral framework. What else has he got?
There are four of life's biggest questions. 1, origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin, how did I come to be? What is the ultimate meaning for my life? Morality, how do I discern what's truly right and wrong? Destiny, what happens when I die? Any worldview that answers these insufficiently is an incomplete worldview. Christianity not only answers them, but answers them with the greatest of ease.
Well, again, atheism is not a worldview. Let me see if I can pull back those 4 things so that I can go over them. Just a little further here. All right. So we had origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Well, for starters, let's cut morality out of there, because we just talked about morality. That was the previous one. So it seems like he's just trying to pad his list of questions here with something we just got done talking about. So origin, meaning, and destiny. Origin, we have a lot of different ideas that have a lot of scientific backing in terms of origin. I mean, specifically, if you want to talk about human origin, we already know that. We already know Homo sapien origin. We know evolution, natural selection. Again, most religious people accept this. Most religious people, even most Christians, view the creation account, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden and everything, as more of a metaphor and not something that is even meant to be taken literally. Most Christians accept evolution. So we know how human beings got here. We know that particular origin. If you want to go all the way back to origin of life, abiogenesis does have a lot of scientific backing. It's just hard to confirm it 100% because we can't go back to when it actually happened. We can't time travel, hop in the Wayback Machine, and go watch it happen. So it's hard to confirm it conclusively. But we do know that every stage, every step between abiogenesis, life forming naturally on its own, and then all the way up to humanity and Homo sapiens, is scientifically feasible. It's not only feasible, it's probable that it can happen. And if you want to go back even further than that to the origin of the universe, we have the Big Bang model. It's been pretty well confirmed, but we don't know what caused the Big Bang to happen. And maybe we will never be able to know, maybe we will always lack the ability to know what, if anything, actually caused it, but not having the specific information for something is no reason to supplant a fanciful tale that does not have much in the way of scientific backing. So just because we don't know the exact reason that something occurred is no reason to say that it was done through magic. The same reason that it was not correct for ancient Greeks to think that the sun was a god riding a chariot of fire across the sky just because they didn't have the scientific understanding of what the sun was, is similar to how we should not supplant an idea of God and magic to the origin of the universe just because we don't have a scientific explanation. So that's the origin one. Meaning, I've talked about meaning hundreds of times before. You derive your own meaning from life. Everybody derives their own meaning from life. Theists, atheists, every time a theist says, I'm doing what God wants me to do, this is God's calling, it is so interesting that it always coincides with exactly what they want to do for themselves. The job that they have, well, this is the job God wants me to have. The family they have, well, it just so happens that they always wanted to have a family. And, oh, they end up having 5 kids. Well, they wanted to have exactly 5 kids, and they say that God wanted them to have 5 kids. It's so interesting that a theist's meaning that they insist comes from God just lines up perfectly with the meaning they want in their own life. So everybody derives their own meaning in life for themselves. And then as far as destiny goes, the idea that there even is a destiny, a predetermined thing that you're supposed to do or life that you are supposed to lead. There's even religious people who don't think that that's necessarily a thing. It kind of strikes against the notion of free will. If you have a destiny, something that you are supposed to do with your life, something that you are supposed to achieve in your life in a predetermined fashion, then doesn't that take away your free will? Doesn't that take away your autonomy that God supposedly gave you to choose what to do with your own life if you have a destiny that you are predetermined to live up to? So yeah, just like with meaning, destiny is something that you should choose for yourself, and I think just about everybody does. So yeah, that was this video of the 6 solid reasons to not be an atheist. And yeah, it was a lot of stuff that we had seen before in other videos. But hey, this one probably predates most all of those other videos. And there was the occasional one in there that I'd not heard before. Like I said, the whole one about the Y-Star Institute was an interesting thing that I thought did deserve at least some talking about. But before we get into some reasons that I came up with why one might not want to be an atheist, I want to go over some of the super chats that have come in while I've been talking there. So LHRPG Official sent in a second one, another $5. Thank you very much for that, saying there is no evidence that our universe began to exist. And even if it did, that doesn't mean that the cause was an intelligent being. Absolutely. Began to exist. I mean, it's really, when you start talking about the origins of the universe, a lot of it becomes semantics. Like, what do you mean by begins to exist? And eternal is another one that is very dependent on what you mean by it. By eternal, the universe being eternal, do you mean that it exists infinitely into the past? Well, it has a starting point. You know, the Big Bang occurred 13.7 billion years ago. But if there was no time before that, then you could say the universe has existed for all time. Therefore, it's eternal. So you get into a lot of semantics. But yeah, there's no evidence that our universe began to exist. I always say this. I always have to quote myself, and I say, the Big Bang was not the explosion of the universe out of nothing. It is the expansion of the current presentation of our universe from an initial state of high density and temperature. So, yeah, we know that quote unquote prior to, before, if those terms even apply, the Big Bang happened, that the universe already existed as a hot, dense singularity. So the universe existed in a different state, quote unquote, prior to the Big Bang. So it didn't begin to exist as far as we can tell. There's no evidence that the universe began to exist. And even if it did, that doesn't mean that the cause was an intelligent being. The cause could have been an entirely natural change in state from how it existed before to how it exists now. There's no indication that there was an intelligence behind it. PB Pencil sent in, "Hiya, Plink. Hiya. Hiya, PB Pencil." PB Pencil is somebody who has been around with me since the beginning of my channel, and every video I put up, they always say, "Hiya, Plink," and I always respond. Thank you very much for being with me since the beginning of my channel and hanging around and being a fan, and thanks for being here today. Ray Elga Tubuelo said, "This guy sure loves poisoning the well, doesn't he?" I apologize if I messed up your name there. But yeah, this video that we just watched had a lot of poisoning the well. Hey, atheists are getting desperate when they talk about the spaghetti monster and they talk about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. Oh, awful silly of them atheists, isn't it? So yeah, there's some poisoning the well going on for sure. And another one from the same poster said, "Straight out of the Hovind playbook." Yeah, we see a lot of the same kind of argumentation and the same kind of rhetoric used by apologists over and over again. And I didn't want to talk too much about the person making this video. Again, it's 16 years old. This person has, aged a lot since then and has maybe even changed their minds and opinions on things since then. But back then, yeah, it seems like they were hearing things that other apologists were saying, whether it was Hovind, whether it was Turek, whether it was J. Warner Wallace, and was kind of taking it and running with it. We see a lot of the same arguments being repeated by apologists time and time and time again. And, it's been a long time since I've encountered new theistic arguments and theistic reasoning, which was one of the reasons why I chose this video, because it at least had one. It at least had one point in there that I had never heard before. It wasn't a good one. The thing about the Y-Star Institute was not a good argument, and but it did take me at least, 10 minutes of Googling things in order to figure out what he was talking about and debunk it. But thanks for being here, and thanks for the super chat. All right, so now that we've looked at some bad reasons not to be an atheist, I was thinking to myself, well, what kind of things would I, as an atheist, come up with if I was asked to come up with good, substantive reasons to not be an atheist? It's counterintuitive, sure, I'm kind of going against the grain by being an atheist and trying to come up with reasons why other people shouldn't be atheists, because I want as many people to be atheists as possible. It was very freeing for me. I think it would be freeing for a lot of other people. But I was able to come up with a short list of what I think are much more valid reasons why a person might not want to be an atheist. First and foremost, and didn't even have to think of this one. This was just the most obvious one that came to mind. If you actually believe that a God exists, if you believe that a God exists, you really have no business being an atheist. That's really the number one most valid answer for why you should not be an atheist. If you actually, truly, deep down believe that God exists, you probably should be an atheist. Now that might be a little bit of kind of a cop-out reason because, hey, the video we just watched were things trying to convince people that God exists, things trying to convince people not to be an atheist through convincing them that God exists, and that certainly doesn't do it, just believing that God exists. But hey, if in all of the looking around and listening to different arguments, I always say that people should hear other people out, should do some exploration into these theistic concepts in different religions and different philosophies. And if in doing so, you encounter arguments that you find personally convincing that God exists, then go ahead, believe in God. I mean, I did that for a long time. I was a theist, I was a Catholic for 30 years before I started having problems with my faith. And when my faith started to falter, I spent the next 5 years looking for good reasons for believing that God exists. And I couldn't find any. I listened to all the apologists. That's when I first encountered Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, the Hovens, all of them, all the big names, as well as a lot smaller apologists, and went to different churches and different denominations of Christianity, sought out other theistic belief systems and what they believed. And after 5 years, I just started hearing the same things over and over again. I wasn't hearing anything new, and none of the arguments that I was presented with convinced me that God existed. But if they had, I would have believed. And so if you encounter arguments that you do find compelling, that you do find convincing that God exists, you shouldn't be an atheist. If you believe that God exists, you shouldn't be an atheist. Another reason, from here on out, there are going to be reasons why one might not want to come out publicly as an atheist, because there are a lot of social reasons why one might not want to declare themselves as an atheist. For instance, loss of religious community or ostracization. So one of the big benefits that being part of a religious community comes with is community. We are a social species. We do better when we have people around us who support us, who care about us, who help us out. Religious community is a big thing in a lot of people's lives. Matter of fact, there are a lot of people who lose their faith who don't want to come out publicly about that, who don't want anybody to know that they don't believe in God, specifically because they'll lose their religious community, and that can be devastating. Particularly if your religious community is all that you know, is everyone that you know. You know, there are some religious communities that are very insular. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. And some of those religious communities engage in the process of separation or disfellowship, whereby if you decide that you are going to publicly renounce your religious belief and your faith, they will cut you out. They will never speak to you again. They will ostracize you. You'll be cast out of the community. You'll be cast out of your home in many cases. And so certainly it can be a massive loss. It can destroy a person's life. But even if you're not in that kind of a massive insular religious community, it's still a loss if you are part of a religious community and you have a lot of people who you care about and who you interact with on the daily, who are a big part of your life, they're friends, family members, and you fear the loss of that community. Now, there are certainly other communities, other organizations that a secular person can join and become a part of. There are youth groups that are secular. There are social groups. There's book clubs. There's organized sporting events that you can join and sign up for. A wide variety of different, more secular communities. But if you have made a particular religious community a large part of your life, that loss can be very devastating. So I could certainly see why somebody whose faith is faltering might not want to come out publicly as an atheist because of the loss of religious community. Another reason somebody might have faltering faith but not want to come out publicly as an atheist is to prevent harassment. A lot of times it's not just ostracization from religious communities, but those religious communities can turn around and engage in a massive amount of harassment, particularly if you're like from a very small town where everybody goes to the same church and suddenly somebody comes out against that faith, comes out against that religion. They can be subjected to online harassment. They can be subjected to personal harassment. A very prominent example here in the YouTube spheres is Telltale Atheist. He had to move because I'm not going to go too much into his story. You can go to his channel and he talks about it a lot, but he had to move from his home in his home state. He had to move his family to New York because when people in his community found out that he was an atheist and a prominent online atheist, he got a lot of harassment. He got a lot of problems in his community to the point where they ran him out. And that can happen to people. You can get online bullied. Your children can end up getting bullied in school if their parents talk about, you and your kids and, hey, that's that atheist family. And even if they don't tell their kids to be mean to your kids in school, the kids pick up on, hey, my parents really don't like this person, say he doesn't believe in God and trying to destroy our faith. Well, I'm going to go and, shove that kid's face into his lunch, something like that. So if you want to avoid harassment, if you're part of a large religious town or a lot of religious stuff in your area, you might want to just avoid the harassment and not publicly come out as an atheist. Another reason, to insulate against the disappointment of loved ones. This kind of is even worse than a loss of a religious community. If you have, say, parents who are very religious, it can be extraordinarily difficult to try to tell them, I don't believe in your religion anymore. That almost can be taken as a personal insult by loved ones, especially if you're talking your parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, people who helped raise you. You might hear, this is not how I raised you. I didn't raise you to be an atheist. I raised you to love God. What are you doing? You're not just going against the faith. You're going against me by doing this. This is not how I raised you. And so it can be extraordinarily hard on a person's psyche to deal with the idea of disappointing their loved ones. My parents are still believers. My parents are still Catholics. And I went through a lot of emotional turmoil about how to tell them that I didn't believe anymore, and really walking on eggshells around it. I was lucky, however, for one thing, my parents have always been extraordinarily accepting of their children's choices. So we don't always politically see eye to eye, and my parents know that, and they don't care. We have totally different interests. They don't really understand all the stuff that I like when it comes to, I go to Comic-Con in full costume and everything, and they don't get it, but they know that it makes me happy and they love me anyway, even though they're not into the comic stuff and sci-fi stuff or anything like that at all. And religion is the same way. Even before they knew that I didn't believe in God, they knew I hadn't been to church in over a decade. And never once did they try to get me to go to church. They always understood it was my decision. They never tried to push going to church or being more involved in the church on me. And so, when they found out, it probably wasn't a big shock to them that I didn't believe. But I still really wrang my hands over it before explaining that to them, because I didn't want a look of disappointment in my parents' eyes. I didn't want to deal with the emotional turmoil of disappointing people I cared about. And like I say, I was lucky. There are a lot of people who have way more strict family members in terms of adherence to religion who would go through a lot more rough situations of trying to be an atheist publicly to their loved ones and have to deal with maintaining those relationships in the face of that disagreement. And then one more reason that one might not want to be an atheist. This one is less about not wanting to be one publicly, but just why you might not want to be an atheist is if you are an agnostic atheist and that agnosticism wavers between atheism and theism. Now, I've always said that atheism and agnosticism are not mutually exclusive. You can be both. I consider myself an agnostic atheist. I look at it as there being, 4 possibilities. Agnostic atheist or a Gnostic atheist, agnostic theist or a Gnostic theist. You're either an atheist that says, I'm sure there's no God, or an atheist who says, I'm not sure there's no God, but I don't believe in one, or you're a theist who says, I'm sure there is a God, or a theist who says, I'm not sure there is a God, but I do believe in one. Now, if you are one of those people who is not sure, who does not claim to know whether there's a God or not, you can still believe that there is one, or you can not believe that there is one. You can be an agnostic atheist, you can be an agnostic theist. And sometimes that position wavers. Sometimes, some days, you feel more like you don't believe in God, and there are days when you feel like you do believe in God. That was a period that I was in during that 5 years where I was trying to find good reasons to believe in God. There would be days that I just didn't believe in God, and then the next day I kind of did. So your agnosticism can waver. And if you find yourself in that kind of a position where it almost changes on the daily, you might not want to commit yourself to something like atheism and say, I am an atheist, because the next day you might not be. And after you give yourself some time to, again, really explore different philosophies and religious ideas, you might come out of it like I did, not believing in any of them and being an atheist and being ready to publicly say, yeah, okay, I'm an atheist. Or during that period of wavering, you may find an argument for God that convinces you, and you decide to go ahead and believe in one, and you accept that argument and line of thinking, and even if you're still an agnostic theist, you pretty well consistently believe in God after that point. But if you're agnostic and you're wavering between atheism and theism almost on the daily, you might not want to insist on one label, because that kind of sticks you into something that you're not prepared to insist upon when it comes to yourself and your beliefs. So those are what I think are better reasons why someone might not want to be an atheist or not want to publicly come out as an atheist. Certainly, number one is the best of those. If you actually believe in God, you probably shouldn't be an atheist. But other reasons why you might secretly be one and want to keep it to yourself that are good and valid reasons to do so. All right, so had another super chat came in while I was saying that. Again, Ray Elga Tubuelo, again I apologize if I messed that up, says, but plink my Romans 120. Romans 120, let me pull that up so that I can show that. Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. How many times have we heard that from apologists? Yes, the idea that anybody who says that there is no God, hey, the invisible qualities and divine nature of God have been plainly seen, so you're without excuse. I said it before in this video, I've said it before hundreds of times, I don't hold anything the Bible says as an authoritative source. So I don't really care. One of my most famous things, I don't care what it says in your holy book. I use quotes from the Bible when I'm arguing against theists, Christians, because, well, they do care what it says in their holy book. I personally don't. But I am not surprised at all that the writers of a religious text wrote into the religious text that anybody who says that the religion is wrong has no excuse. Seems a bit obvious, doesn't it? That people who are pushing for a religion to be accepted are writing things into their holy book that says, hey, you've got no excuse for not accepting our religion. Seems a little obvious, doesn't it? So, yeah, of course, classic Romans 1:20 right there. All right, so let's move things along and let's talk about some religious news that has come out of the last couple of weeks. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks, that's for certain. Obviously, probably the biggest story where religion is concerned is also having to do with the Olympics. So last weekend was the opening ceremonies of the 2024 religious games in France, and I watched some of them, some of the opening ceremonies. I was mostly interested in watching all of the athletes come in. Normally, in normal Olympics, they come into a big stadium, they all kind of walk in, but this was different. They were all on boats, and they were going down the river on boats, and so I wanted to see, how many different athletes were representing each of the countries and everything. So that's really why I watched. But there was a lot of different stuff going on during the opening ceremonies, one of which caught some backlash in the religious spheres. And that was a part of the opening ceremonies towards the end of it, right about at the end of it, when there was this fashion show, drag fashion show, and it had this one part of it that Christians got all in a tizzy about, saying that it was blasphemous because it was supposedly mocking the Last Supper. And this here is where you can see the comparison of the two. This is the shot that really got their knickers in a twist. For starters, and what was almost immediately apparent after they blew up and said, "Oh, you're blaspheming the Last Supper with this. This was such a clear disrespect towards Christianity," is that it was not supposed to be the Last Supper. The Last Supper scene was, in fact, based on paintings of Greek gods, says art experts, particularly this painting here, which is called the Feast of Dionysus. Now, in the shot, the picture that Christians pointed to say, hey, this is blasphemous, you'll notice a difference here in this picture here from this picture that we see here. Where's this blue guy here in this picture that they wanted to point to? Because right seconds after this shot was taken, this blue guy here was slid out onto the table. And this guy is clearly a representation of Dionysus. Dionysus was always depicted as having a crown of berries and grapes on his head because he was the Greek god of wine. So he always was depicted as having grapes around him, just like in this picture where he's eating grapes while he has a crown of grapes on his head. So this is obviously a representation of Dionysus, and so to be watching the opening ceremonies and to see this, and then see this big blue guy with a crown of grapes come on the stage, and then say, oh, this is supposed to be the Last Supper. Well, this is the Last Supper. I don't see any blue guy with a crown of grapes on his head on top of the table. So it almost seems like they should have known that this was not a representation of the Last Supper. Also, seems pretty appropriate that they would be referencing a painting of the Greek gods, given that this is the Olympics, Olympics, having to do with Olympus that originated in ancient Greece, where they paid homage to the Greek gods. Kind of seems a little obvious, doesn't it? So when the Christians got all upset about this being a mocking of the Last Supper, it just was immediately seized upon by, anybody who wasn't a overreactionary Christian and said, no, this is the Feast of Dionysus. It's not a slight against Christianity at all. I mean, really, when you look at these two pictures, the only way to think that this is in any way supposed to be indicative of the Last Supper is that in the Last Supper, they're all lined up on one side of a table, and here we have all of these people lined up on one side of a table. That's a pretty weak connection, especially since this isn't a table. If you'd been watching the opening ceremonies, this is a runway. They were having a drag fashion show prior to this shot being taken. And so there were people walking up and down this runway. There's no food on this runway the way there's food on this table, no plates or anything like that. They're not wearing the same kind of robes or anything close to the same kind of vestments or anything like that. Is obviously, if anything, especially with the inclusion of the Dionysus figure, was supposed to be a reference to the Feast of Dionysus. Now, most people got that. After the overreaction 24-hour periods after it happened, most Christians were like, oh, okay, it's not supposed to be the Last Supper. We didn't know that. It kind of seemed like it was. They pulled back a little bit. But, unfortunately, the Vatican is a little slow on the uptake. And it was only just, they posted this today, the story of the Vatican having some words about the Last Supper. And the statement from the Vatican said, "The Holy See was saddened by certain scenes at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympic Games and cannot but join the voices raised in recent days to deplore the offense done to many Christians and believers of other religions," it said in an unusual weekend evening press release. So this is a press release that came out this weekend, a week later, and it's now well understood that this was not supposed to be a take on the Last Supper, that this was supposed to be about Dionysus and the Greek gods, and it was not supposed to be a slight against Christianity. And even though that's kind of well understood now, the Vatican only just now is like, yep, we condemn this. We condemn the deplorable offenses done by the opening ceremonies. Slow on the uptake is the Vatican. But that wasn't the only news to come out of the Olympics in recent days. Matter of fact, it didn't take long for focus, where the Olympics are concerned, to shift away from the opening ceremony to something that is not particularly a religious story, but it is something that, you'd be forgiven if you understood it almost as a religious story, given the high amount of Christians and conservative Christians who are blowing their top about this. And it's the Olympic boxers. So specifically, the gender controversy concerning the Algerian boxer Imaine Khalif. This one right here. This woman right here. She had a fight with another contender, and it only lasted 46 seconds because the other boxer stopped after taking one good shot to the face. Said she'd never been hit so hard before, and so she tapped out at that point. Now, after that happened, a lot of people started getting upset, claiming that this boxer, Imaine Khalif, is a trans woman. Imaine Khalif is not a trans woman. Imaine Khalif is a biological female. Always has been. Assigned female at birth. Born a girl, raised a girl, lived as a girl her entire life, has never been anything but a woman. But there is some controversy about it because of a ruling that was made by the International Boxing Association. I found the press release from the IBA, the International Boxing Association, that was made in 2023, last year, that disqualified Imaine Khalif from competing under their regulations for the Women's World Boxing Championship in New Delhi 2023. Now, they said that two boxers, Imaine Khalif and Lin Yuting, that they were disqualified, and it was the result of a failure to meet the eligibility criteria for participating in the women's competition as set and laid out in the IBA regulations. This decision, made after a meticulous review, was extremely important and necessary to uphold the level of fairness and utmost integrity of the competition. What did they fail? Well, the athletes did not undergo a testosterone examination, but were subject to a separate and recognized test, whereby the specifics remain confidential. So they're keeping it confidential. They're not even fully explaining what the test was. And they said that it was a recognized test, but that's hard to confirm because they're not even saying what the test was. But what is important to note is that the IBA, the International Boxing Association, does not have any say over the Olympics. The IBA said in a statement at the time that Khalif and Lin had failed to meet eligibility rules following a test conducted by an independent laboratory. And then it was said by IBA President Umar Krevlev that it was proven they have XY chromosomes, which is seen in men as opposed to XX genotype for women. However, it is medically possible for women to have male chromosomes in rare cases. Separately, there are a number of health conditions, most notably polycystic ovary syndrome, that can cause women to produce excess male hormones. So, it's not cut and dry that if you have XY chromosomes, you are automatically, completely 100% male. And it's just, there's a lot more variation to that. There's intersex, where there can be a variety of different chromosomal makeups. There's not just XX and XY, and even if you do have XX and XY, that's not a rock-solid indication that you are male or that you are female. There's a variety of different conditions that can cause one to have chromosomes like that. There's mosaic chromosomes, where you can have some chromosomes in your body that have one genotype and other chromosomes that have a different genotype. So, again, Emaine Khalif, born female, assigned female at birth, lived as a woman her whole life. Let's also keep in mind she's from Algeria. If you don't know about Algeria, it's literally illegal to be trans in Algeria. If the Algerian authority had even suspected that Emaine Khalif was biologically male, not only would they never have let her be on their Olympic team representing them on a global stage, she would be in jail. So, certainly not biologically male in any way that her own country recognizes. And the IBA has no say over the Olympics. The IBA is no longer the governing body of Olympic boxing. And this is not because of this situation. This goes back to different things. The IOC, which had already overseen boxing competitions for the Tokyo Olympics, officially voted to de-recognize it in June of 2023 after a years-long dispute over the integrity of its bouts and judging and transparency of management. So the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, has had problems with the IBA for years, and they decided last year that they didn't want to recognize them anymore as any kind of having any say over the boxing that is done in the Olympics. And when it came to these competitors, these boxers, the IOC says that they recognize them as women. Said in a Thursday statement, the IOC confirmed that all athletes participating in the boxing tournament comply with the competition's eligibility and entry regulations, as well as all applicable medical regulations. So, yeah, there's been, tons of people in the last week have been calling Emaine Khalif a man, including J.D. Vance said it. A lot of prominent politicians have been saying it. They've been going on news programs and they've been full on saying that that Emaine is trans, that Emaine Khalif was born a man and underwent hormone treatments to become a woman so that she could go into the Olympics and beat up women and stuff like that. Of course, J.K. Rowling on her high horse about it and everything. And a lot of conservative Christians just braying that Emaine Khalif is a man, is a man, is a man. Based on what? Based on being born, not that it's anybody's business what's in her pants, but born with female genitalia, born as a woman, lived as a woman her whole life. Nobody's ever said she was anything but a woman. In fact, 4 years ago, she competed in the Olympics in boxing as a woman. Nobody had any problems with her then. Nobody said anything about it back then. And, it's not like she's just utterly and completely dominating everybody she ever gets into a fight with. Her record, she has a 9-5 professional record. So she's lost bouts several times to other women. So it's not like she's just absolutely going in there and beating the crap out of every opponent. So yeah, there's a lot of misinformation about this story, but the International Boxing Association has no say over the Olympics. They won't even disclose the exact specifics of the test that Emain Khalif supposedly failed. And even if it were the case that Emain Khalif has XY chromosomes, that is not a conclusive insistence that she is in fact a man. So, yeah. Again, not completely a religious story, but definitely something that took focus off of the opening ceremonies and was also another example of a bunch of people on the religious right blowing up about something that was they were completely wrong about. So let's move away from the Olympics now and talk about something else that is a bit of religion and a bit of politics. And it's when Trump was talking to potential Christian voters and insisting that they needed to vote for him, and if they did, they won't have to vote anymore if he's elected. So this is something that occurred in the last week. Donald Trump was at a Turning Point Actions Believers Summit. So he was specifically addressing a crowd heavily full of Christians in West Palm Beach, Florida, and he said some remarks that many found to be quite disturbing. He seemed to say that if you vote for him, if you get out and vote for him in this election, you won't have to vote in 4 years down the line. That's kind of chilling, because that gives one to wonder, are you meaning that you're going to destroy democracy to the point where there won't be elections in 4 years, or what? Now, I don't want to take him out of context, so let's watch exactly what he said, short little video, and see exactly what he said so that we can hear his own words on the matter. Interesting point I want to cut in with. He said vote absentee. I thought it was a big thing with the Republicans that they wanted to get rid of absentee voting. Haven't they said that that leads to widespread election fraud if we allow absentee voting? I've seen tons of GOP members saying we got to get rid of absentee voting. You have to show up in person on election day to cast a ballot, or else you don't get to vote at all. Well, Trump just said he doesn't care if you vote absentee. Seems to not be towing the party line on that one, but let's continue. Okay, so before I go into the whole you won't have to vote anymore thing, a lot of people were thinking that he just said that I'm not a Christian. I think it was just a little slur in his speech. I think he was saying, I'm a Christian. Let's go at it again. I think he was saying, I'm a Christian, but some people are hearing it as, I'm not a Christian. I think it was, I'm a Christian. Even though he's not. I mean, he's about as Christian as I am. The only way he's a Christian is that he claims to be one. He does not go to church. He has never been religious in the past before. He's never spoken about religion at all until he started getting into politics and started courting the Christian right and wanting to get their votes. And then all of a sudden it's, I'm a Christian. I remember when he was asked what his favorite book of the Bible was, and his response was, oh, it's all good. I can't pick one. I like all of it. Yeah, you can't pick one because you don't know a book of the Bible. So, but the big thing here is, was he saying that you won't have to vote again in 4 years? He did say that. He said you won't have to vote in 4 years because we'll have it fixed so good you won't have to vote. The question is, what did he mean by that? Did he mean that we're going to fix this country, all the problems with this country so well that even when there is an election 4 years from now, it won't matter who you vote for because we will have this country fixed so well, won't matter who the president is after me. Is that what he meant? Or did he mean in 4 years, we'll have completely used the Supreme Court and the judicial system to overthrow the democratic process of voting and instituted me as president for life and at least gotten rid of the whole 2-term thing, and I'll be able to stay in office indefinitely, and then after me it'll be handed down to my kids and blah blah blah. I guess I would probably lean towards the first one. I mean, he's an egomaniac, but I don't know that he's so much of an egomaniac that he thinks he can overthrow the democratic process of electing a president in 4 years. But maybe so. Anyway, you slice it, it was a bad way of saying things. I mean, how can you be a public official running for public office, running for the highest public office in the country, and you go on stage, get in front of a mic, with all of the experience that he has doing that, all of the experience that he has as a speaker, and say something that can so easily be taken badly? I mean, how could you let that come out of your mouth and not think, people are going to take this as me meaning I'm going to overthrow the government? Especially in the light of, January 6th, where his followers, instigated by him, tried to overthrow the government. So, yeah, that's what he said to some Christian voters at a Turning Point Actions Believer Summit. So, take from that what you will, I suppose. All right, so that's the religious news for the day. And before we go on, let's talk about a few super thanks that have come in since I've been talking about the news. We had one from The Final Fanboy, sent in $5 and said, allegedly, there was some French news station or something that called it the Last Supper, but I haven't been able to find proof of that. There were a lot of media outlets who were jumping on the bandwagon and saying that this was the Last Supper. I mean, certainly it was all over Fox News, and certainly a lot of other international or media outlets from other countries were saying it too. I mean, it was all over the place. So that's kind of something that shows how the media can self-perpetuate itself, and they can take something and run with it, and they don't really get it from official sources. They just hear what some other news agencies were saying, and, well, I trust what that news agency says, so I'm going to use that in my reporting, and it just sort of self-perpetuates itself. When I was learning journalism in college, we learned about it. It's called agenda setting theory, and it's the idea that the media can actually control what everyone thinks about stuff by how they report on it. And I mean, it seems so obvious. Like, why do we have to have an actual theory that talks about this? It just seems so obvious that people get their information from the media. So when the media tells them something, they very often just accept it. And so when you have media organizations getting their talking points from other media organizations, who are getting their talking points from other media organizations, who are just sort of making stuff up whole cloth, that's how lies can perpetuate and spread through the media. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that there would be a station who called out the opening ceremonies as a dig at the Last Supper without checking on that, and some other media organization saw it, put it on their news, and so on and so forth, and it snowballed. I can believe that for sure. Ivan Lupo sent in a super chat saying, Da Vinci was gay, LOL. Da Vinci, having been the artist behind the Last Supper, yeah, a lot of stuff about him that Christians wouldn't take kindly to, one of which being that he was allegedly gay. So the fact that they lean so heavily on the Last Supper when it was created by somebody who they would in many ways like to disavow as a person is kind of laughable for sure. There's certainly a lot more great art that came out of Christian antiquity and Christian influence. The Last Supper just gets a lot of good press, doesn't it? And Anonymous Pie sent in a super chat and said, "We didn't hear anything from Trump." Do you ever hear anything worthwhile from Trump? I mean, I've made my thoughts about him known many times. Not a fan myself. So whatever he says, you got to just sort of try to interpret it as best you can. It was very interesting that the line of attack that Trump and the Republicans at large had against Joe Biden was that he seemed to be in cognitive decline. Every time he gets on a mic, he doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. He flubs stuff. He gets stuff wrong all the time. He says seemingly stupid things, all because he's so old. And now Biden's out of the race, and Trump is the one who's saying silly things every time he gets on the mic and getting stuff wrong and flubbing stuff, and is literally the oldest person running for president in the history of the country. So all the stuff that they were saying about Biden is now fallen on Trump, and it's all applicable to him now, isn't it? So that's interesting. All right, so next we're going to talk about some questions from fans. So every time I do one of these live streams, once it has concluded and it goes up on my channel, go into the comments section if you have any questions you'd like me to address specifically and give more lengthy, well-fleshed out answers to. So the previous live stream, I went through the comments and I pulled out some questions from it. So let's dive into some of those. First question from the last live stream came from 21 Red, White, Blue. And this is when we were talking about the idea of people's rights in response to gay weddings and LGBTQ rights. So this person, 21 Red, White, and Blue said, "I'm a gay guy. I absolutely support a person's right to not sign off on my marriage certificate if my marriage and lifestyle is against their religious values. I support their right to not bake a cake for my wedding. I support their right to not photograph my wedding. I don't get to trample on other people's rights. Rights belong to everyone, and sometimes those rights clash. When they do, you work around it. Their rights are just as valuable and deserving of protection as mine. If that doesn't happen, that's no longer a right. It's political privilege and preference." I agree with you to an extent. Everybody's rights do matter. But if we're talking about somebody who works at the courthouse and is supposed to be signing off on a marriage certificate, they do not have the right to not do that because they are supposed to be carrying out the law. They are supposed to be a representative of the state, of the government, and they are supposed to be acting as a representative of the state and government. And in that capacity, they're supposed to sign off on that marriage certificate. So saying, "I don't believe in gay marriage personally," great, fine. Leave your personal feelings at the door. You are working as a representative of the government, and it is your duty in that capacity to sign off on this marriage certificate. If you don't do that, you are not doing your job, and you should not have a job. At least, you should not have this job. And so, if somebody who is legally obliged to sign off on a marriage certificate doesn't do it, it's not violating their rights. They are violating the rights of the married couple because they have to get their marriage certified in order for it to be legally recognized. And now you're saying that even though the state they live in, well, the country they live in, accepts it, that they can't get it done because of one person at the State House who refuses to stamp a form because it's against their religious views. If it's against your religious views to do your job, then you don't get to have that job. Period. So, I agree with you that everybody has their rights, but when you are acting in an official capacity, you are obligated to live up to the rules and the regulations of that official position. If you don't do it, you don't get to have that position. So the person who won't sign off on the marriage certificate should get fired. Simple as that. Do your job. If you don't do your job, you don't get to have the job anymore. Period. So that's my position there. Another question. Last live stream, we were talking about a map and a study that had been done where they ranked all the states in terms of how well they protected religious freedoms. They gave a list of criteria that they looked at. One of those was whether or not the state protected houses of worship from closing. And I said, I don't really get that. I thought that maybe it meant that if a church attendance was really low and they weren't bringing in enough money, that state money, taxes, would be used to keep the churches open. And I thought that was wrong. Apparently, I was wrong about that. Jay Condren wrote in and said, houses of worship protected from closing is a reference to laws saying that churches cannot be ordered to close due to public health crises, etc. So, okay. I didn't understand what that had meant. This makes total sense, especially in the wake of the pandemic, when a lot of churches were ordered by the government, by the governors and the state officials, that they had to close due to public health. And that became a big point of contention, and a lot of churches got ticked off about that. So now apparently there are new laws and regulations in some states protecting houses of worship from closing as a result of things like a public health crisis. I'm against that. I think if there's a massive public health crisis of communicable diseases, houses of worship should close. I mean, they shouldn't have to even be forced to close. They should do it themselves. They should be very willing to shut their doors in order to stop the spread of communicable diseases, because, I don't know, it just seems to me like good policy to not want everybody in your congregation to get sick because one person came in and coughed and hacked all over everybody in the church, and now everybody's sick with it. Seems like they should be all on board with saying, hey, you know what? We'll do a Zoom church service this week. You know, we gotta keep people safe. Prayer's not going to stop communicable diseases. If you don't recognize that, if you don't recognize that going to church is no barrier from getting sick from somebody at church, I don't know where your head's at. So, I'm all in favor of houses of worship during times of public crisis where everything is being closed, schools are being closed, businesses are being closed. Everyone everywhere is not getting together in large groups because of communicable illnesses. That should probably extend to churches too, as far as I'm concerned. Another one came in from last live stream, bit where we were talking about the fine-tuning argument. Ten Stalf 27 says, Prof. Plink, I think you missed the point of the fine-tuning argument. While some do ask it in terms of fine-tuning for life, maybe specifically conditions of the earth being fine-tuned, that's not the real issue. The physical constants of the universe do appear to be fine-tuned, the strength of the various forces, masses of particles and such. Tiny changes in them would result in stars not forming. That would prevent pretty much any kind of life. Personally, I think these values are the only ones possible, but the multiverse hypothesis is another possibility, which is why his follow-up on question was about that. It's a fair question. So, yeah, when I was doing the 36 questions for atheists in the last live stream, one of them was about fine-tuning, and I guess I addressed it primarily in terms of the Earth being fine-tuned for life, or the universe being fine-tuned for life, and saying that it wasn't, 99% plus of the universe would kill all life almost instantly. So it wasn't fine-tuned for life. I guess I didn't talk about the idea that the universe is fine-tuned in terms of things like strength of the various forces, the gravitational constant, the electromagnetic force, masses of particles and such being fine-tuned. Well, much like this person goes on to say, I think these values are the only ones possible. That's a good point when it comes to the idea of these forces being fine-tuned. Is it even possible that the gravitational constant of the universe could be anything other than what it is? How would you calculate that? How would you calculate the possibility of the various magnitude of the forces even being different? It seems to me that things like that are a result of the whatever it was that caused them. If you have an explosive that goes off, what are the odds that the explosion is going to go outwards at 100 meters per second versus the odds that it's going to go outward at 1 meter per second? The odds of it going outward at 1 meter per second are nil. There's no way it's going to move that slowly. The explosion, the amount of explosives that were used, the type of explosives that were used, the forces at play dictate how fast that explosion is going to go. So it's not even possible that there are other values to that explosion, other speeds that explosion could have exploded at. It's totally down to the makeup of the explosion. Similarly, I don't know that it's possible for the constants of the universe and the values of the forces at play to be any different than they are. Until I see some kind of evidence that it's even possible that the values could have been different than they are, how can you say that the universe is fine-tuned? How can you say that any of these forces are fine-tuned if you don't even know if it's possible for them to be different? So, yeah, I guess I didn't talk about that aspect of fine-tuning last time around, but we did here today. Another question. So, one thing I talked about last live stream, and for several live streams, I've kind of been going on about this, a bit about the abortion debate. This is not particularly in reference to abortion, but to bodily autonomy. It has long been my position, and remains my position, that no one owes any part of their body to anyone else for any reason ever. And in the last live stream, I gave an example of that in terms of a mother cannot be legally forced to breastfeed her child if she does not want to. I got a few people pushing back about that. Not a ton of people, but I got a handful of responses disagreeing with that. And here's one of them. XBob42 said, bit of a whiff on the breastfeeding example for the abortion gotcha question. Pretty sure if you let your baby suffer or die because you refuse to breastfeed, you'll be in jail for neglect. It's your responsibility to feed your children. So if you couldn't breastfeed your child yourself, you'd still be responsible for obtaining breast milk or some alternative nutrition to keep that baby healthy. As a very last resort, you might have to turn the child over to someone who could care for it. Otherwise, agreed with your other points. I get that making an off-the-cuff argument can be a lot trickier than a prepared one, though. I absolutely agree that if you have taken responsibility for a child, you gave birth and you agreed to take the child home and have accepted responsibility for it, you do have to do your level best to provide nutrition to that child. I never said anything different. I said you cannot be legally forced to breastfeed if you do not want to. Now, certainly, if you don't feed the child anything at all, ever, and the child dies of malnutrition because weeks went by and you did not give the child anything, yeah, that's neglect, and yeah, you will go to jail for that. But if you decide to not breastfeed the child for whatever reason, I'm saying you cannot be legally forced to do so. You do have to try to find alternate nutrition, certainly. You have to try to get formula. You have to try to, worst case scenario, if the child can't metabolize formula, they have some kind of condition where they can't take that kind of nutrition and they can't eat baby food, they can't eat anything else, going to the hospital and getting a nutrient IV put into them or something to that effect. I'm not saying you don't have to provide any nutrition at all. I'm saying you don't have to breastfeed your child if you choose not to. Now, I couldn't find any examples of anybody who was arrested for neglect of a child insofar as they were arrested because they didn't breastfeed, charged with neglect because they chose specifically not to breastfeed. And in fact, all I could find was a question to pediatrics about whether or not it's okay to breastfeed, and they said that if you're unable or choose not to breastfeed, it's definitely okay, and you're not alone. Canadian and U.S. surveys have shown 10 to 32% of mothers never begin breastfeeding, and 4% stop within the first week of life. So approximately a third of all mothers don't breastfeed. Now, certainly they find alternate nutrition for their child. They even go on to talk about there are safe and nutritious alternatives to human milk. So all I was saying is that if a person chooses not to breastfeed, if a mother chooses not to breastfeed her child, she cannot be legally forced to do so. And then I got a couple like scenarios where somebody would say, well, what if somebody was a mother of a newborn infant and they took that infant home and they were way out in the woods, far away from anybody who could help them, and a big storm came and cut off power and snowed in the roads, and they absolutely couldn't get to the hospital or anything, and they didn't breastfeed their child. Okay, so we're getting into some really extreme scenarios here, but even there, if there were absolutely no other food, no formula, that mother had no formula, no baby food, well, what if she was against breastfeeding? What if she had a moral problem with it? What if she thought that it constituted cannibalism, and she's against that, and she thinks it's immoral to eat another human being in any way, including breast milk? Kind of a crazy thought, but what if it was? What if she said that was her religious positions? There are people who will let their child die in need of a blood transfusion. They're called Jehovah's Witnesses. And if their child is in an accident, a car accident or something, and they go to the hospital, and they need a blood transfusion, or they will die, and the doctor can be standing right there with a bag of blood saying, I need to give this to your child, or your child will die in the next 5 minutes, the parents will say, we do not believe in that. We do not believe that blood should be passed from one person to another. Do not give my child that blood. And that doctor will legally have to stand by and let that child die. So if that is something that won't get those parents prosecuted, I have to believe that if you have a religious or moral compunction against breastfeeding, and you are in some kind of extreme scenario where your child cannot take in any other kind of nutrition other than breast milk, and you cannot get them to a hospital where they can get proper care, but you tried everything. You tried regular milk, and you tried baby food, and you tried everything else you could to get some nutrition into that child, and they just couldn't take anything, but you morally refused to give them breast milk. I can't imagine you're going to get prosecuted. I can't imagine anybody's going to go to jail and get arrested, and on the arrest warrant it says, refuse to breastfeed her child. So all I'm saying here, I'm not saying you don't have to try to provide nutrition for your kids. You absolutely do. I'm not saying you can just let them starve and do absolutely nothing about it. I'm saying if you choose not to breastfeed your child, the way 1/3 of all mothers choose not to breastfeed their child, you can't be legally forced to do so against your will. That's all I'm saying. All right, one more question from the last live stream. From Darwin to Jesus says, here's my question. In your response to my video, you said morality is real subjectively. If I say God is real subjectively, does that mean God is real? So, we're talking about two completely different, fundamentally different things. When we're talking about morality, we're talking about a concept. I've said it 100 times, all morality are value judgments. Value judgments occur in the brain, in the mind. They are concepts. They are perspectives on right and wrong. They occur totally in the brain. You are claiming the Christian position is that God exists outside of human conception, that God is an externally existent being, whether humans know about him or not, whether humans think about him or conceive of him or not, God exists. Even if every human was to die, that God would still exist. So we're talking about two completely different things, concepts versus an externally existent being. So if you want to say that God exists in the same way that morality, that subjective morality exists, as a concept in the mind, sure, I totally agree with you. In fact, I've been saying that for years, that God is nothing more than a product of the human mind. I absolutely agree with you. So, yes, subjective morality is real in the same way thoughts are real, concepts are real, perspectives are real, opinions are real. They are products of the mind. If you want to say God is real in the same way as a product of the mind, sure, go nuts. That's exactly what I think, that God is a concept that humans came up with, the same way that subjective morality is a concept that humans come up with. So there. All right. So those were some questions from the previous live stream. And like I said, if you have any questions yourself that you would like me to address in a little more depth and go into, once this live stream ends and it goes up on my channel, go into the comments section, ask the questions there, and I'll be happy to pull it out and talk about it a little bit next time around. Oh, Kelly Walker said... super chat that said, specifically there was no audio from Trump. Oh, you mean when I was playing the video there was no audio to it? Oh, I'm sorry. That would be an error on my end. I'm sorry about that. I'm glad it wasn't a long video then. I'm glad it wasn't a, 5-10 minute thing that I played and responded to and there was no audio to it at all. So sorry about the lack of audio there. Rather than it being a video I had downloaded, I was just playing it off of YouTube, and I guess I didn't have it set up to play audio off of YouTube properly. But it was just a 40-second clip. It's easy to find on YouTube. You can go and hear what he had to say yourself. Sorry about that. If I ever play something off of YouTube again during a live stream, I'll make sure that I've got the audio working for it. I could hear it when I was playing it, but I guess I didn't have it set up to play into the stream as well. So sorry about that. My apologies. All right. So we will start to wind things down then. We've covered all the stuff I have for us for today. So thank you for being here, everybody. Before I go, I want to make sure to send a shout out and a thank to all my Patreon supporters. If you would like to become one, if you like what I do here, you like my live streams, you like my videos, and you'd like to financially support my work directly, go to patreon.com and you can support me over there. Also, if you want any Plinky merchandise, my Teespring store is linked in the description. I've got coffee mugs, I've got stickers, I've got shirts and sweatshirts, and so if you want a little cycloptic pink tribble to show around, go there to the Teespring and you can get it there. If you want to keep up with me and what I do throughout the course of the week, I'm on Twitter fairly regularly. You can also interact with me there if you want to send me any messages or interact and chat through Twitter. Check out my Twitter, also linked in the description. So that'll be about it for today. Thanks for hanging out with me, everybody, and we'll do it all again in a couple weeks' time. So until next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.